for your leadership on this. And as you can see, all of my colleagues on this subcommittee have a passion for this issue and intense interest. I think what we've been able to find today are some very specific ways in which to deal with the online issue. And Ms. Soros, in particular, your laundry list of things that you have asked Backpage to do that they have not done certainly would help, both in terms of finding missing kids, as we say, prevention, as you say, and in terms of law enforcement and prosecutions. There are also other things that can and should be done with regard to sex trafficking. We did pass legislation, as you know, here in Congress that was signed into law earlier this year. You were very involved with that, and you worked with us particularly on some of the missing children issues who are the most vulnerable to trafficking, but also the demand side issue. We were able to make some progress at the federal level for the first time in 15 years. And then finally, we were able to change some of the federal, the bias in the legislation to say that these young women and men, girls, boys who are involved in this are indeed victims and should not be treated as criminals, but rather as victims so that we can deal with their trauma, which, as you said earlier, is long-term, sometimes lifelong. And so this is, I think, an opportunity for us not just to talk about Backpage and the obvious disappointment all of us have and their inability to be here today, but also their unwillingness to cooperate more generally with this issue. But it's also a chance to talk about efforts we can take going forward to combat sex trafficking and to try to put an end to sex trafficking in this country. So we thank you very much, both of you, for your testimony this morning. Mr. Roberts, thank you for your hard work. I know you'll keep it up nationally, working with all the attorney generals. And Ms. Soros, and for John Walsh, who's here, and John Clark, who are here in the National Center, thank you for your leadership on this, and to all the groups who are out there in the trenches working on this issue every day, and particular shout out to those who are embracing these victims and helping them to get through this trauma. Having met with victims in Ohio, some of whom are only recently, going into a treatment and recovery process, and others who have been at it for years, this is the most heartbreaking and difficult part of this whole process. And so thanks to all those groups that are involved and individuals. We would excuse you, and we are now going to call the second panel. I'd like to call the CEO of Backpage, Carl Ferrer. We had hoped Mr. Ferrer would be here, but he has refused to come. And we've talked a lot about the underlying sex trafficking issue here this morning. Horrific practice that goes on, sadly, here in the 21st century, really one of the great human rights causes of our century. We've also talked about the fact that we have not received cooperation from Backpage in looking into some very legitimate questions that have been raised. And our report lays out enough evidence to make it clear why we need the information. At this point in the hearing, we had planned to hear testimony from Backpage's CEO, Mr. Carl Ferrer. Mr. Ferrer has been under a legal obligation to appear before the subcommittee since October 1st, and the subcommittee notified him by letter on November 3rd that his appearance was scheduled for this morning. The same day we sent a letter, the subcommittee staff called Mr. Ferrer's lawyers to confirm that Mr. Ferrer should plan to appear and that we could not accept logistical excuses for not showing up. Mr. Ferrer's lawyers did not mention any conflict of interest. Last Friday, less than a week ago, Mr. Ferrer's lawyers asked us to excuse his appearance because he was traveling, and that if called to testify, he would plead the Fifth Amendment. They did not say it would be impossible for Mr. Ferrer to appear. The subcommittee denied that request on Monday. A witness has the right to refuse to answer questions that may incriminate him, but that right belongs to the witness, not his lawyers. It is appropriate to require a witness himself to appear, hear the questions put to him, and to exercise his constitutional right not to answer any questions he believes in good faith may tend to incriminate him. Again, as I said earlier, this subcommittee would respect any valid assertion of Fifth Amendment privilege. But there's no privilege not to show up. Yesterday around noon, however, Mr. Ferrer's lawyers wrote to Senator McCaskill and myself informing us that Mr. Ferrer would not appear today because he is on an international business trip. This is truly extraordinary. You heard from Senator McCain earlier, who said that in his many years on this subcommittee, he has never seen a situation where a witness simply refused to appear. It's not acceptable for a witness under subpoena to wait until the day before his appearance to announce unilaterally that he will be out of the country and refuse to appear. Senator McCaskill and I, of course, are conferring about next steps, but we both consider Mr. Ferrer's refusal to appear here a clear act of contempt. I'd now like to turn to Senator McCaskill if she'd like to add a few words.